This is Hannibal here from the HannibalTV.com. And tonight we have a paranormal related interview, not just paranormal, but also UFOs and a little bit into possible life after death. I have as my special guest an author, television show host, radio show host. She does a little bit of everything, but she is an author of 3 books: Haunted Las Vegas, Alien Encounters in the Western United States, and I Survived Beyond and Back. Tracie Austin, how are you doing?
I am doing fabulously. How are you doing?
I am doing excellent. You are in Las Vegas now, but for anyone watching, they can detect that you have a British accent. So how did you come over to the United States?
Oh, boy. A long time ago in 2001, I actually relocated from England, originally to California. And my ex-husband, who is American, and I lived in California for a while, excuse me, and he is now an ex-husband, and we came to Las Vegas actually to buy a house, and actually bought it at the wrong time of the market, and I ended up having to sell my house to a very dear friend of mine in the UK, which so that worked out absolutely great, and sadly, the marriage is no more, and I'm still here in Las Vegas at the moment and been here for 14 years, and it seems like far longer than 14 years, to be honest, because it's just gone so fast.
Well, that is a good place for you to be as far as UFO research, because Nevada seems to be a hub for that type of thing. Nevada and Arizona and New Mexico seem to be 3 states where there's a lot of activity, whether it's because of all the military bases around there or other reasons. I'll get your opinion on that later, but how did you become interested in UFOs?
Well, here's what happened. My background is a musician. I was trained as a classical concert pianist, and I was in the middle of London at the time, studying at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama in the middle of London, when I had a broad daylight UFO sighting. And to be honest with you, I had no idea what I was looking at, Devon, the day I actually saw this object. And I was with my best friend, who was a guitarist at the time. He was my partner. And we are in the place where we stayed as students, and we're just having a regular conversation. And in this particular room, there was 9 windows looking out over the city of London. And it was a crystal blue sky day, about 2 p.m. in the afternoon, I think it was. And I'm looking out the window, and we're just having a conversation, and something caught my attention. And it was something that was metallic. And I looked at this thing and I said, what the bleep is that? You know, what the bloody hell is that? As we do say in England, being a Brit. And he came over to the window and looked out with me and said, oh my God, that's a UFO. And I said, what do you mean, UFO? And he began to tell me he'd been interested in these things as a kid. I necessarily hadn't, but I've always had an interest in things that were not normal and very weird and strange. So he proceeded to tell me what it was, and I said, okay, then you mean this thing is piloted by something else, someone else in the cosmos, in the universe? And he said, yes. And I said, oh, okay. So I continued to watch this thing. I wasn't afraid of it. And I just watched it. And it was a cone-shaped object, pointed at the top, rounded at the bottom, and it was rotating in a anti-clockwise motion. And I knew it was metallic because of the way that the sunlight was actually glinting off it. And so we stood there together watching it, and it was very slow, moving very slow across the sky. And we watched it till it went out of view. And it wasn't that high up, and I really don't have a really great guess of how high up it was. This was in 1987, and but it was low enough for me to see that it was a cone-shaped object. It was metallic because the sunlight was glinting off it. And so we watched it go out of view, and of course I was telling everybody about it. I just could not shut up about what I'd seen that day, because it was the first UFO I'd ever seen. And the very next day, we actually go on the subway, the underground train station. I can't remember where we were going, but we were traveling somewhere. And we come out the other end of the subway, and there's a guy selling newspapers at the entrance of the underground. And there on the front page of the Evening Standard newspaper was the article, UFO seen over the city of London. Now, there wasn't a photograph, but we know that other people had seen it because it had made the front page of the Evening Standard News. And so that's really how it all began, with the very first UFO sighting. And to be honest with you, it's never stopped. It's continued to this very day. And I've had over a dozen sightings. The majority have all been daylight sightings. And it kind of found me. I didn't find it. It found me. And once you've had a sighting, and I'm sure a lot of your followers, and I know you have a lot of followers, 242,000 followers, I'm sure have had sightings of UFOs. And when you do, it's like you just can't dismiss it. You can't throw it away. You can't forget about it. It just pulls you in hook, line, and sinker, and you want to know more.
So did you suspect that it was something from out of this world when you saw that very first one, or did you think it could have been some type of military craft?
To be honest, I believed what my partner had told me at the time of what it was, because there was no noise coming from this thing. It was not like a conventional aircraft. It had no wings. And like I said, it just defied everything that we know as a conventional aircraft. I mean, who sees a metallic cone in the sky? It's not normal. So I believed what he was saying, that it wasn't from here. Yeah.
Now, why do you think that these things have appeared to you so often? Because 12 sightings is a lot for one person to have. Most people don't even have one.
That is true. And the only thing I can attribute that to is that I've been an intuitive person all my life. Being a musician and studying music, which was 7 hours a day, 7 to 8 hours a day, performing with an instrument. And so you're focused and you're intent on, being a professional with your instrument. There's a certain sensitivity that musicians have. And I'm not saying that all musicians have these kind of sightings and experiences, because they don't. I guess there's just something about me, and I've embraced it. I haven't ignored it. I've embraced it and welcomed it. And, like I said, I've always had an interest in things that were not of the norm.
Did the ships all look similar, or were each of the UFOs kind of unique in their own way?
They were all unique in their own way. And that is actually the only first cone-shaped object I've ever seen. That's the first and only one ever. And I'm going to be 56 years of age this year. So I've seen a lot, but that's the only cone-shaped object since 1987. I've had a sighting in England beyond London, when I left London and I moved out back to my hometown of Staffordshire, I actually was putting together a UFO conference back in 1996. And a month before organizing that conference, I actually had a boomerang sighting, a boomerang-shaped UFO sighting, which the BBC heard about, and they came up to my hometown of Staffordshire. And we did a reenactment of that sighting that I saw. And it went on to BBC Digital of that actual sighting. So the boomerang, I have actually also seen, not with the naked eye. This is very interesting. When I came to the US in 2001, I went with my then husband to the Grand Canyon. And I'd never been to the Grand Canyon before. It was the first time. And I was amazed at this beautiful scenic area, scenic view that I was seeing. And so got out my camera, just a regular camera. It wasn't even a cell phone camera at that time. It was just a regular camera. And I took 3 panoramic snapshots of the Grand Canyon. And I just went 1, 2, 3. And the whole film I took to be developed of other sightings and things like that, different, touristy things. And we get the photographs back and I'm flipping through them and I come to the Grand Canyon photograph. And I said, oh my God, what do we have here? Right in the middle, and I have that photograph to this day, right in the middle of the Grand Canyon is a silver disc. And it's flying right over the Grand Canyon. Now, the naked eye did not pick that up, but the camera and the speed of the camera shutter did capture it. And you can actually see distortion around, I want to say the back end of it, but I don't know if it is the back end of it. It could actually be the front end of it. But I do remember talking to the late Stanton Friedman at a UFO conference some years ago about this particular sighting that we'd had. And excuse me, there we go. And I was telling him about the sighting that we'd had, and he went on to say, I've had exactly the same kind of sighting with the distortion around it and everything, and showed him the photograph, and he'd had the same kind of thing. So that was there at the Grand Canyon, but also in Las Vegas, which is very, very strange because what I've actually seen out here are spheres, silver balls, silver spheres in the sky, which is very, very strange because I've never seen those in the UK. I've never seen them in California, but only here in Las Vegas. So more or less, it's been that kind of, shaped object out here in Las Vegas.
There's a fan on here, Carlos, that wanted me to ask you if you think there's a connection between sleep paralysis and contact with aliens. Quite
simply, no. No. Sleep paralysis has nothing to do with it at all. That's something completely different. I was very, very, very fortunate to be very dear friends with the late Dr. Roger Lear, who had removed, up until the time of his death in 2014, he removed 17 alien implants from people's bodies. And I was actually present at the removal of one of those surgeries. I was honored that he allowed me to sit in and talk to the abductee who had an object in her arm. She was an airline stewardess, an American airline stewardess who was having this thing removed. So I got to hear the whole story from the horse's mouth, as it was. And no, I can categorically tell you sleep paralysis has nothing to do with it. These events are very, very real events and experiences that people are having. And I'm not saying that these alien beings can't, put you in some kind of a free zone that you can't move because they're going to do what they need to do. But sleep paralysis is something quite different than an encounter with an alien being.
Now, I know Bob Lazar, I think, lives in Michigan now, but Anthony wants to know if you've ever spoken with him.
I've never personally spoken with Bob Lazar. I would like to. He actually reached out to me a few years ago now to be friends on Facebook. And so we're friends on Facebook, but I've never actually had a one-on-one conversation with him out here or anywhere. And I'm not sure now that he actually attends any conferences or anything like that. But we just said, hello through Facebook, but haven't really talked about the subject of UFOs, no.
Yeah, he's very reclusive and hard to get a hold of. I believe it's that Jeremy Corbet guy that kind of made some type of deal with him and took him around to do the media rounds around the same time that their Netflix film came out. But to just randomly get an interview from him would be difficult, I think.
It's difficult. I don't know, maybe being a blonde British gal.
Yeah, maybe he'll like your accent.
Maybe he'd love my accent. Who knows? Maybe I ought to try and do that at some point. But after a while, I can understand him being reclusive and not really wanting to talk too much about it. He's spoken about this so many times, and the story is the same story over and over. Maybe I could think of some questions that he may have not been asked before. Who knows? Stay tuned to that one.
Well, you do have a very charming accent, I must say.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Birthday Bio says, is there any footage of any of these doctors removing the alien implants from humans? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
I can. Actually, Dr. Roger Lear had a website called alienandthescalpel.com. And I know a lot of that footage was actually on his website. There are DVDs that he actually also put out at conferences like the UFO Congress. So if any of your followers, your fans and followers want to see something like that, I would say reach out to the UFO Congress of the years back prior to 2014, when Roger was always invited back as a guest to talk about these phenomenal objects, because you'll find footage there on those lectures that he did. He may have some out privately that he placed on Amazon, and like I said, I know that there was footage on his website, Aliens and the Scalpel. Since his death in 2014, I don't know where any of the private, maybe like the one I was at, the removal of the airline stewardess, my ex-husband was filming that at the time. And that was really for Roger to use at the UFO conferences in his lectures. So I would check out UFO Congress that used to be in Laughlin. It had since moved to Arizona. So I check online there. Maybe it's just ufocongress.com. And I'd also check out Alien and the Scalpel, aliensandthescalpel.com to see what's there also. Roger did actually write a section in my book, Alien Encounters in the Western United States, because I'd asked him, being a dear friend of mine, and of course he was the only doctor doing this at the time, a very long time ago. And so I wanted him to write sort of like a chapter in the book discussing all of this, which is called Fact or Fiction in the book. And there are photographs that he allowed me to use and put in the book of these implants. And they're very, very, very bizarre. Very, very bizarre. A lot of them are metallic. They are T-shaped. They are delta-shaped. Whereas the one that came out of the airline stewardess's arm was not metallic. It was biological in nature. And hers came out the right hand side of her body in her forearm, whereas the others that Roger had taken out were metallic and came from the left-hand side of the body. And I always remember Roger telling me about this and how strange that this was, that all the metallic ones seems to come out the left-hand side, but the biological one came out the right-hand side. But the strange thing about this is that everybody seems to say that once they've had these objects removed, that they all feel this new sense of freedom, this newfound sense of freedom. So if you've been taken, your mother's been taken and your mother's mother's been taken, because what they are doing is they're following a family lineage. They're very interested in a certain characteristic within our DNA. And we don't know what that characteristic is, by the way. The research is ongoing with that. And I know Dr. David Jacobs has done phenomenal work with abductees in this subject, in his books, The Threat and Secret Life. There's a number of really great researchers out there. Dr. David Jacobs is one of them. Bud Hopkins, the late Bud Hopkins, obviously was another great guy who'd done a lot of research also into these things. But Roger primarily was removing them. So there's a family lineage and there's a certain characteristic. And if you don't have that characteristic, then they don't want to know. You're safe.
Very interesting. So would you think that all the species are studying us like that, or are various ones in particular involved with the human abductions and implants, and others maybe just surveying the land?
I think so, Devon, to be honest. I mean, what we typically hear a lot of time and time again, over and over again, are these gray entities with, you know, the big black eyes, the small nose, the small mouth. Those are the beings that seem to be doing all the work. They're also typically referred to as gophers with a lot of people I've spoken to in my research. You know, they go for this, they go for that. They're gophers. And they're working for a hierarchy of being. Now, we don't know who those beings are. We don't know if they're reptilian, but or if they are Nordic type beings, because many of them have been seen on the ship together. And I know in my book, Alien Encounters in the Western United States, there are accounts in there of the witnesses that I spoke to seeing both reptilian and grey beings on the ship together, and labeled as not so nice guys. Nordics are apparently very benevolent. They are very helpful to people. They've even healed people of cancers and, you know, certain ailments that they've had that doctors just were baffled how everything just, you know, the disease or whatever they had totally disappeared. So, and I know that Travis Walton, when in Fire in the Sky came out, he talked about seeing, he thought people had actually come to help him. Human beings had actually come to help him on the ship because they were human looking, but they weren't there to help him. And I can only presume, like, he thinks that, you know, they were those Nordic beings because he was the one that was there and witnessed it all. So, yeah, I think, you know, from the stories that the people that I've spoken to, the research I've done, and the people I've interviewed as guests on my show, it always seems to be these grey entities that are doing this work.
And I believe in that professor from Jerusalem, was it, that, or the Israeli general, in his book, somebody translated the epilogue of it, and he said that a ship had been found with some of those alleged gray-like bodies in it, and it didn't appear that they had a way to eat or discharge food, so that would kind of lend some credibility to that theory that they might just be clones or some type of bots, maybe.
Very possibly. But you know, I went to the UFO Congress in 1997, I think it was. It was the first time I'd ever gone to the UFO Congress in Laughlin, which is about 90 minutes from where I'm here in Las Vegas. And I met a gentleman of the name Bill Uhouse. And probably some of your listeners are familiar with Bill Uhouse. And I got a one-on-one conversation. He's now deceased. He actually died a couple of years ago. But I had a one-on-one conversation with Bill. Very nice man, super, super nice man, and came across very credible and very honest of what he was trying to tell me. And he said to me that he and a bunch of other guys were working for a certain division of Area 51. And they had to build a flight simulator built on a crashed disc that came down in Arizona, Kingman, Arizona, which is a very famous UFO crash incident in Kingman. I think it was in 1954 when this happened. And one of the gray beings was captured and taken to Area 51. And Bill said to me that he was a 5'5" gray alien being, and he would sit up in a certain room with a glass beveled window looking down on Bill and the other handful of guys that were working on this flight simulator based on the crash disk that this being came from, which, by the way, was nicknamed or codenamed J-Rod. And he said whenever we were stumped of where a certain piece of metal would go or a part of the device would go, and we didn't have a clue where it would go, we would have a thought back in our head that would come from J-Rod that was sitting up high up in another room, looking down on everyone. And he'd tell them where to put that piece, where it would go. And he said to me, to answer your question about how they eat, he said, I never went to dinner with them, if that's what you're asking, because I was asking what they ate and how they ate. And he said they have their own kind of forms of utensils that would be similar to a fork, but different. And he said, and when you first see them eat for the very first time, it's very, very off-putting because there are no facial muscles. So their facial structure is not like ours whatsoever. The whole muscle structure is very different. He says, so it can be a little bit off-putting. But he says you get used to it after a while. And he said to me that they've got their own substance of what they eat, which he didn't go into, but some was like a fluid that they drank. But he said to me, I did build them a shower. And I laughed and I said, well, what do you mean a shower? You mean a shower in the normal human way of a shower? And he said, well, kind of similar, but no. This device, he said, had certain bugs that came down from the shower, landed on the being's skin. He said, and these bugs would just absorb all of the gunk and whatever that was on their skin, and the whole thing would be recycled. And that's how they would clean themselves with this particular type of shower. Now, I have no evidence of that. He didn't draw that for me, but he told me about that and was very serious when he told me that. He said he had photographs of J-Rod, and he was not going to show any photographs at that time, but his lady friend had seen photographs of J-Rod, and typical, like I said, typical 5'5" gray alien, big black eyes, slit for the mouth, a little nose, but he complied. He complied with what was being asked in order to put this flight simulator together. Now, whether J-Rod is still here to this day, who knows? And I don't know. I'm sure that there's probably some workers out at Area 51 or Wright-Patterson Air Force Base that know the story and know where J-Rod went or if he's still here. But I don't know.
Interesting. There's a fan on here that wants to know about animal mutilations and if there's any correlation between UFO sightings and animal mutilations shortly thereafter in zoos of the regions. I haven't heard too much about zoo animal mutilations.
Neither have I, to be honest, but I think that could be because they're obviously in captivity, they're in cages. Not that that would stop, I guess, an alien being from mutilating an animal. Maybe one has, and it's all been kept quiet and under wraps. We don't know for sure. But of course, Linda Moulton Howe is one of the, foremost researchers on this subject. She did a documentary called An Alien Harvest. And actually, she's an Emmy Award winner. And I would advise your viewers and your listeners to get hold of that documentary. I think it's a book as well, because she won an award for that, an Emmy, for her work with cattle mutilations. And they always seem to be out a lot of the time in rural areas. Denver, Colorado is where a lot of the mutilations appear. It's something I personally haven't researched, but Linda has, and I think she probably, I don't want to take anything away from Linda because she's the expert, but I will tell you this. When I first had my sighting in 1987 of the cone-shaped object, as I researched it over the years, I came to read about the cone-shaped object that had been seen over certain rural areas of either farms or just, grassland fields with cattle. That object had been seen taking cows up into a beam of light into that particular shaped object. So whether that is purposefully for that, who knows? But that's what I'd read when I find that interesting.
There's a fan on here that was asking about the connection of UFOs and Bigfoots. I don't know too much about that, but I do know you've also researched some of this Bigfoot stuff over the years.
Well, I've had on my show, the Let's Talk Paranormal show and the Tracie Austin show, I've had guests on the show that have been, Bigfoot experts. And I haven't done any research myself, but I've interviewed. And I encourage your fans and your followers to go to the archives on KGRA Radio and listen to the shows. Timothy Renner comes to mind, brilliant researcher. Also, David Weatherly is another brilliant researcher. And yeah, strangely enough, there seems to be some correlation that people do see UFOs and Bigfoot. And a good friend of mine who's a producer in California named Renee Barnett did actually put together many years ago with a British team of producers a documentary called Bigfootville. And probably your fans and followers have seen it on TV, maybe the History Channel or whatever. And it was years and years ago. But that all came about because in Oklahoma, people had seen a Bigfoot that had actually, now get this, and I find this really bizarre. I mean, I'm 5'2". This Bigfoot strided a 5-foot fence and was seen by the locals of a certain area in Oklahoma and a medicine man. And so Renee decided with this British team to go out to Oklahoma and put this documentary together called Bigfootville. And it's a real phenomena. It really is a real phenomena. I would love to encounter something like that. I'd love to go on an expedition. I've just never had the opportunity to do that. But who knows what may come in the future. But there does seem to be some correlation between the UFO sightings, lights in the sky, and Bigfoot. And he seems to be a very mystical kind of creature. I hear that you'll never actually be able to find remains of a Bigfoot. I hear that they do bury their own dead. They do bury their own kind. But I don't think we'll ever probably capture a Bigfoot. And I hope we don't, because they have a right to exist just like we do.
I know you've done a podcast on this with Preston Dennett, who I've also interviewed, but Birthday Bios wants to know your thoughts on the connection of UFOs and water, which it seems like most of them can also go underwater.
Absolutely, they can. And I've recently been in touch with Jorge Martin in Puerto Rico. And I'm hoping to have him on the show here very, very soon, because we've been talking back and forth, and he sent me certain images of UFOs coming out of the water there in Puerto Rico. The locals see this all the time. This is very, very normal. And of course, Preston Dennett, my dear friend, who I interviewed on my show last night, actually, he just come out with a brand new book. I might as well plug it, UFOs at the Drive-In, which is phenomenal. I mean, who knew? Who knew that there'd be UFOs at drive-ins, but drive-in theaters? But yeah, there are. But he also wrote a book. I think it's called Underwater UFOs or Underwater Base or something like that. But yeah, people see this, and people have seen it off the coast of California. And certainly, like I said, Jorge Martin, I'm hoping to interview over the coming months, because it all seems to be happening there in Puerto Rico. And you know, it has done for decades. So is there an underwater base? I'm thinking so, yes. And I think the Navy have seen things on board their ships coming out of the water or coming from the sky and dropping on a dime and going underneath the water. So there's something going on. There's really something going on our planet. And who knows if we'll ever get to the bottom of it.
Why do you think that they aren't announcing themselves or being so secretive? We've heard that same Israeli general claim that they don't think we're ready. And apparently, according to him, the government knows, but they've been told not to say anything. What's your theory? Because it seems like one of these species types would eventually want to not be so secretive.
To be honest with you, Devon, I think we have been drip fed over the many, many years of this whole subject, this whole phenomena. I think we have been drip fed. I don't think anybody wants to step forward as yet and actually claim, our government, that yes, we have been visited for a very long time. We are still being visited. I don't think they know how to perhaps handle it themselves. I don't know if they even know what they're dealing with. And we also have to bear this in mind. Maybe they really still don't know to this day in 2021 what they are dealing with this off-worldly presence. It was talked about that President Trump was going to make an announcement. He was going to sign some document to release something about UFOs. And we hear this from every president, and probably it's going to happen. We're going to hear something from President Biden sometime in the near future over the next 4 years. Who knows? But it never seems to happen. And I have to ask at this point, do we really need a president of the United States of America to actually come forward and say, yes, we've been visited. Yes, they're here. We've kept it quiet because is disclosure already happening among us? I believe it is. And I think these beings are wanting to do this in this manner and maybe it's a certain race of beings who are doing this in this manner, meaning the Greys, obviously. Who knows? I mean, President Eisenhower apparently was the very first president to actually meet with Nordic type beings in the 1950s. And they wanted to share information of how to heal society, how to, put out certain information that would help our society from diseases, etc. And among other things. And Eisenhower didn't want it. He wanted their technology. And they said, no, you're not ready for it. And so they did apparently warn him. And I know that Richard Dolan is at the forefront of all of this with President Eisenhower. But they warned him that there would be another race of being that would come and talk to him about this, and they were these small, diminutive gray beings. And lo and behold, they did. Those diminutive beings came, had a conversation, they had a meeting, and they were asked to keep records of who they were taking, a list of people, and apparently that list was never made. And it's gone on and on and on to present day. And who knows when that agenda is going to be over. Who knows?
Jacob is asking about the FISA documents. I have no idea what those are. Do you?
I have to be honest, I have not heard of the FISA documents. I tell you, someone who might have, another fellow Brit, dear friend of mine, Nick Redfern. So maybe that's something that Jacob wants to reach out to Nick Redfern about, because I don't know what those particular documents are.
Whatever happened to that off-world material, not of Earth announcement that the Pentagon mentioned this past summer of 2020 that they'd be releasing more information about this off-world material, not of Earth. But here we are in February 2021, and we haven't heard anything further about it.
Right. Well, isn't this usually the case? I mean, years and years and years ago, and I'm going back many, many years ago, maybe a couple of decades or so, there was going to be a certain road show that was going to there was going to be parts of the wreckage, of the Roswell wreckage on show, along with one of the alien bodies. And this was talked about for a very long time. It was going to be done, and the government were behind it, and never transpired. Somebody must have got cold feet at the last minute, because it never actually happened. So that whole thing went away. And probably this is likely with this metal that we heard about last year. Maybe somebody got cold feet and decided they weren't going to release anything further from it, and it's kept hidden until maybe another time.
Samurai 101 wants me to ask you about HARP, which I am not familiar with either.
HARP is, I haven't researched HARP. It is a very private project. Don't know anything about it because I've not researched it. Again, you need to perhaps, follow Nick Redfern. Richard Dolan is an authority as well on this subject, but I'm not really an authority on HARP as such. So I'm sorry I can't answer that for him.
Now, you also have done a lot of research into consciousness and what happens after you pass away. We hear that some of these alleged extraterrestrial encounters involve telepathic communications. Is there some type of consciousness connection with these ET beings as well, that they understand better than we do, perhaps?
I definitely think it's all connected, actually, Devin. I do. Yeah. They're able to home in and facilitate whatever that telepathic energy is, that, whatever conscious is surviving beyond death. And whatever that consciousness is, it has to be the same. I'm presuming that these ET beings are able to tap into and telepathically communicate with their abductee. So there always seems to be some form of amnesia with a lot of abductees, that they don't remember. And it takes a little while for something to, hit home, maybe a flashback of something. They don't remember consciously of what happened to them. But it all starts to come back with flashbacks at some point. That's usually the step that, proceeds after an abduction. But yes, to answer your question, I do think these ET beings are able to tap into consciousness and do what they do. I think it's all connected.
What made you get into this study of consciousness and all of these near-death experiences that you've been researching?
There it is. My new book. I survived beyond and back. What actually happened, Devon? I lost my father in 2017, who lived in England with my mom and my sister, and didn't expect my dad to cross over to the other side. My dad was 83, never had surgeries in his life, was always a very, very fit man. And actually, none of my family members have ever had surgeries. So we must have really great genes or whatever, but never had surgeries. And it was a kidney issue that my dad had, renal failure, and along with the heart. And I honestly thought that my dad would actually kick it and be okay, and he'd be back to normal. And of course, that wasn't the case. And I got to see my dad a week before he passed. Now, I've always been interested in near-death experiences and what people experience when they cross that threshold of death. Of course, my dad did not have a near-death experience. He made a full transition onto the other side. But that is what my dad's passing is what spurred me on to want to know more and to talk to people who'd had experience. Now, I've never had a near-death experience, so I can't speak firsthand about that. I've had an out-of-body experience, and there are similarities to that, but it doesn't really touch what near-death quite is. And so I can honestly tell you, and I write about it in the book, chapter 14, which is called Surviving Beyond, of communication with my father. Now, my dad was one of the biggest skeptics ever, along with my mum. And they thought that, when you die, you die. Once you're dead, you're dead. That's it. Blackness, nothing. That's not the case. And of course, my parents having lived in the UK, and I've been out in the US since 2001, I would Skype with them instead of, picking up the telephone and talking with them via phone. It was always nice to see them face to face on Skype. And so I would often bring up this subject of death and dying. And I would say to them, look, I know you don't want to talk about this, but whoever happens to pass first, will you please make an effort to communicate with me and tell me that you survived, you made it to the other side, you're safe, and everything's fine. Well, my dad, of course, in particular, would look at me, he'd roll his eyes and he'd look away and he'd say, okay, Tracie, just to try and appease me. And so November the 20th, 2017, my dad passed. And in April of 2018, my dad started to make contact with me. And I didn't know it was my dad at the time. And how it all happened was I'd actually moved house a month after my dad had passed. My partner and I moved house, and it was a bigger house, and we had to buy more furniture. And we bought this huge, big, beautiful bookcase because I used to have a TV show in California called Let's Talk Paranormal. And I'd have a lot of publishers send me books of authors so that I could have them on the show as guests and talk about their field of expertise. And so The day came, the bookcase arrived, and I haul up these big boxes of books out the garage, and I'm putting them on the shelf, and I come across a book I hadn't seen before. And it was called Into the Light, which is written by a doctor, Dr. John Lermer. He takes care of 2 care hospices in Houston, Texas, and they're the 2 largest in the world. And he wrote a book about what the dying see 3 to 5 days before passing, which is deceased loved ones and angels. And I thought to myself when I saw this book, why have I never read this book? I didn't even know I had it. And so I looked inside. The letter was in there from the publisher, and it was dated 2007. So I'd had it for 10 years and never read this thing. So I thought, that looks interesting. I'm going to read it. So I did start to read the book. And one night I went into my guest bedroom because it was nice and peaceful and quiet. My partner was watching TV in the master bedroom, and I came in the guest bedroom to read the book. And I read a chapter about an elderly lady named Mildred, who was about 75 years of age. She had stomach cancer, and she was in this care hospice that belonged to Dr. Lermer. And she knew she wasn't going to come out alive. And Dr. Lermer goes into her room one morning, asks how she's doing, and she says, well, I'm doing fine, Dr. Lermer, but I need to ask you a question. Why am I seeing deceased loved ones in my room? And he said in the book, I didn't want to speed up the process of her death. So I said to her, you know what, Mildred? Well, maybe they are. Maybe they are stopping by to pop in and check on you like I do every morning and make my rounds. So maybe they're just coming to see how you're doing. She says, okay, well, then let me ask you the second question. Why am I seeing angels? So he said, I asked her to describe what she'd seen. And she says, well, they always stand in a particular corner of the room. They reach the height of the ceiling, which I imagine in a care hospice can be really no higher than 9 feet, I would think. I know they're 9 foot in England, so I'm presuming they're the same here in the US. And they stand there, they reach the height of the ceiling, they're a certain width, and they illuminate all this beautiful bright white light internally outwards, a little bit like a light bulb. And they said to me, she said telepathically, Mildred, we cannot communicate with you unless you initiate it. You have to be the one to initiate it. So she reached out to them and in her head said, I want to communicate with you. And they did. Well, when I read that, I sat back on my chair and I said out loud, oh my God, I wish my angels would talk to me. I'd love for my angels to talk to me. And boom, the light went out. So I sat there for a minute. I wasn't afraid because I've had weird things happen all my life. And nothing did happen. And so I glanced across at the clock on the bedside table. It said 10 p.m. And I thought, well, it's kind of getting late. I'll just put the book away and I'll read it tomorrow. Well, I got up off the chair. I didn't walk halfway past the bed. And boom, the light came back on. I knew in my heart of hearts that somebody wanted to talk with me. Somebody wanted to communicate when that happened. And so I scooted right up to the side of the bed and I said, look, I don't know who you are. I don't know if it's you, my angels, or if it's you, Dad, wanting to communicate with me. But I have to thank you for making the effort and doing what you've just done, because I know that takes one hell of a lot of effort to do that, what you've just done. But, please feel free to come and visit me whenever you want to and when you can. So I was one with the light for a moment, and then I switched it off and I closed the door. Now, there's only my partner and I that live here, and at the time, my 3 cats. And that door is always closed. So no one's in this room. No one's in that particular room. And so I withheld from telling my partner because he was very skeptical at the time. He's a businessman. He has a business head. Things are either black and white. There's no gray area. It can only be this or this. So I held off from telling him, and I wrote an email to 2 of my spiritualist medium friends in the UK, and I told them exactly what had happened. They both got back to me and they said to me exactly the same thing. Tracie, This is not the work of angels flipping lights on and off. They don't need to do that to get your attention. And they're in a much, much higher realm. This is your dad communicating with you. And so I was like, oh my God, that's fantastic. My dad was a skeptic. He didn't believe. But now he does. Now he believes, now that he's on the other side. So I can honestly tell you, and I make notes in my phone of the days and times that he actually comes to visit. And it's been non-stop from April 2018 right up until this month. January the 28th was the most recent date that he came to visit. Other than that, Christmas Eve was when he came. And it's been a whole month, just past a whole month. But there's only 2 months that he didn't come to visit, and that was February and September of 2020, I think it was. And I'm not sure why that was. But I've had continual contact. I receive feathers inside the house. I receive pennies from my dad. I have the most profound experiences with hummingbirds that he sends to me, and also dragonflies. So it's absolutely real. And I've heard my dad talk to me on EVP. I have a couple of friends in Arizona who have created a device called the Evox, which I also write a little bit about in the book. And it's through that device I've actually heard my father give me a message. So it's all very real. I've heard it with my own ears, and no one can tell me anything different. A little bit like having the UFO sightings. I know what I've seen. I know what I saw on every occasion, and there's no two ways about it. So it's a real phenomenon.
So would you explain your father visiting you as a ghost, or is that just him visiting you as a spirit, choosing to visit you? Because we hear about all these various types of ghosts. So do people have a choice of what happens once they cross over? What's the deal from your research?
Well, you've got to understand that the deal from my research really is near death. And what they've actually said about crossing over to the threshold of death and then coming back to talk about it. I believe that a ghost is something different from a spirit. I believe a ghost is the soul of a human being that once lived and maybe cannot accept the fact that they have crossed over to the other side and feel that they have unfinished business that they need to deal with here. I have seen a ghost. I can tell you, I write about that in my other book, Welcome to Haunted Las Vegas, Nevada, and it was headless. And that was in London, and I had a witness with me when that happened. So, no, I don't believe my dad is a ghost. No, I believe my dad has fully made it over to the other side. He's in a certain dimension, and he wants to let me know that all these times I've been asking on Skype to, whoever crosses first to give me a sign that you're okay, you made it. And he has given me those signs. And so I think a spirit is totally different from a ghost. They have unfinished business. They may not believe that they've actually crossed over. Maybe it's been from, a traumatic accident, a vehicle accident or whatever. But something very different from spirit who wants to switch on a light or whatever. And actually my mother's experienced things too, and my sister. So, and they are big skeptics. I've been the only believer out of all four of us, to be honest. So I've always known that the other side exists. So
what about these people that experience hauntings where they're very negative and they're described as like demonic type hauntings? Are those just people from the other side that are very troubled, or what would you describe that? Do you think there's actually something more on the other side?
There's a lot more on the other side, and we don't understand it. we don't know, and we don't know how we're able to hear these voices and see what we see. I would advise you actually to have my dear friends on your show. They have a great show on KGRA. They're called Entity Voices, Tony and Sherry Rathman. And he's the guy that built the Evox, who I've heard my dad speak to me through. So I would advise you at some point to have him on your show, because I think your fans and your followers would love to listen to some EVPs of what's being collected through their research. Yes, I think demonic, and that demonic realm is something completely different from ghosts altogether. Something completely different. Poltergeist activity, that's something that you really don't want to mess with. Along with Ouija boards. I don't advise getting involved with Ouija boards whatsoever. They are a no-no. But yeah, demonic, poltergeists, they are of a different dimension, a different realm. And there's a lot of cases out there, a lot of really, really bad cases out there. And it's completely different.
Why do you think the UK is known as such a haunted place? Is it just that there's so much history there, or is there another explanation? Yeah, I mean, it all stems back from the history. We have a lot of old buildings and land that America doesn't have. It doesn't really match the history of England whatsoever. Yes, you have land which, Indian burial land, for example, can stir up things and make things happen. So, a lot of people are under the misconception that, let's say, a new house, you're not going to get any activity in a new house. I can categorically tell you that is not true. I've written about it in Welcome to Haunted Las Vegas, Nevada. It all depends on the land. And that's how these things come through. And there's a lot of Indian burial ground here in Las Vegas. It's full of it. So, and it doesn't matter what side of town you're on. So, and then sometimes these attachments can follow you where you go, and it's hard to get rid of attachments. So, yeah, I mean, to talk about England, we have a lot of history there. I was actually watching that interview with Robert Bigelow and George Knapp the other night, where he said that in his new research project related to consciousness and life after death, there has been some issues with some of this stuff following the researchers home. And that's been one of the negative things about it for some of them, because it's affected their families, not just the researchers.
Really? I hadn't heard that. I had seen the interview with George Knapp, because I went on George Knapp's Coast to Coast show and Mystery Wire. That's another podcast that he has. So I saw that particular interview with Bob Bigelow on his Mystery Wire, and it was a great interview. Listen, yes, these things do happen. It is very real. And it's very important to actually protect yourself when you go and do these things and you go in investigations, or even, looking into this kind of thing. You've got to protect yourself, say the St. Michael's prayer of protection, which you can find online. Sage yourself as well before doing any of these things. But I think that project is a really great thing. I would love to get involved with it, but unfortunately I can't, because my evidence is published in the book I Survived Beyond and Back. So I would love to be able to be a part of the whole thing and submit this essay that he's wanting in 25,000 words or less, and provide photographs and also audio files of my dad talking to me. But I can't do it, because it has to be something that's unpublished. Otherwise, I'd love to be a part of it. But I know it's a global essay, and they're looking for input from scientists and religious scholars and consciousness researchers. And I did recently see on Netflix Surviving Beyond that Leslie Kean has just put together. And she and her crew have done a phenomenal job. So kudos to Leslie Kean.
Yes, I haven't had a chance to watch that yet, but I've read her book on that survival after death and found it very interesting. I actually hope to go to the UK. I was supposed to go last year, but I haven't been able to with the lockdowns. But I just want to go on a trip where I stay in a bunch of haunted places and document my experiences. So maybe I could get some advice from you if they ever open up the border. A good options.
Absolutely. I mean, I haven't been in the UK now for 20 years. It's been quite some time, but it wouldn't take long for me to get in touch with some of my people over there and put some, haunted places forth to you. I think you'd have a great time. You just got to try and go when the weather is good, because the weather's absolutely lousy over there. It's a little bit like the Seattle weather. It's rain and more rain. Rains cats and dogs all the time. But yeah, find a good time to go, which is typically during Wimbledon, when we have our, tennis season, Wimbledon, which is the end of June through to July. So I think that time, end of June, maybe through to August, might be the best time to go. I hope you make it. I hope that COVID, I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon this year, but I think it'll probably be sometime in 2022 before that really,
Yeah, I was supposed to go to cover actually a wrestling event there, and I was just going to base my trip around that time, but I hope it's not until next year, but I guess time will tell. It's not looking good right now, at least here in Canada.
Yeah.
How is it there in Vegas for the lockdown and everything?
Well, we're not on lockdown at the moment as such, thank God, but they are suggesting wearing double masks. And listen, I mean, I'm claustrophobic. I don't like to put anything over my face like that. But of course, you've got to take this seriously, because it is very, very, very serious. But we're not in a lockdown. The UK is on a lockdown right now until I hear February 22nd, which is a long, long time. I believe my sister's getting the vaccination tomorrow. I have to say I have a hard time with needles. I only as recently as last year, 2020, was okay with going to get blood work done. I've had a phobia with it all my life with needles. I don't know where it's come from. Probably I brought it in from a past life with me. But having said that, last year I did manage to get blood work done 6 times. So I'm proud of myself. I did it. Now I have to mentally think about this vaccination, because, hey, my mom and my sister are back over in the UK, and there was talks here that before you could even get on a plane and go to another country, you had to be vaccinated. So I've got to wrap my head around that somehow and be okay with it. And I don't know how I'm going to do it, but fingers crossed. If I have to have it, I have to have it.
You better hope that you're never abducted and given one of those shots without your consent or will, or you'll be in some trouble.
Well, that's another story. I mean, I have had some experiences. That's another story, one of which I had to have regression for, because I went missing in Florida some time ago. It was in the 90s. But probably that's another show and another story. But one I was conscious for as well that happened to me in England. But like most people, I didn't have a bad experience. I had an experience that was okay.
Very interesting. Well, we'll have to get into that another time. I'll put up your books again here. Haunted Las Vegas, Alien Encounters in the Western United States, and I Survived Beyond and Back, True Accounts of Near-Death Experiences, all by Tracie Austin, which I assume you can get all of these on Amazon.
You can. Actually, the only one right now is I Survived Beyond and Back that you can't, because I'm going through some publication changes at the moment. But I'm hoping that by the end of this week, fingers crossed, that that's all going to be taken care of and I can put it back up online, and that will be available. It's a very interesting read. They are compelling accounts of true near-death experiences of those people who glimpsed the afterlife. And like I said, talking about my dad in the final chapter, and the communication that we've had, and the many different gifts of feathers and pennies and things he's sent to me. And, you know, I have to tell you real quick also, I went to see John Edward, the psychic medium, last year. He came to, not last year, 2019. I keep forgetting we're in 2021. And he came over to Las Vegas, and he said to me that the easiest way to communicate with a loved one in spirit is to actually write them a letter, because they do see it and they do read it. Well, within a couple of days of going to see John and John saying this to me, I had to put it to the test. And I had a journal that I had bought many years ago. I think it was in 2012. And it was a beautiful journal. I didn't just want to write anything in it. And so when John told me this, I thought in my head, oh God, I can now write in the journal to try and communicate with my dad. Well, I'd already had communication with my dad anyway since April of 2018, like I mentioned. But I had to put it to the test, and I did put it to the test. And I can honestly tell you, hand on heart, my dad obviously saw and read that letter, because within a 24-hour time frame, my dad came and visited. So if any of your people, you know, your viewers, your fans, followers have lost loved ones like I have, and we all have, and if you want to make communication, I just want to pass on the advice that John Edward told me. Write them a letter. Just write to them as normal as you would if they were living. And ask for a sign. Always ask for a sign and be patient. I got real lucky because he came pretty quickly. But, you know, you do have to be patient. And he said, if you find a penny, which is known as a penny from heaven, and I've had a few now from my dad, he says, check the year on the back of the penny, because the year will be of significance to you. And I can honestly say that every penny I've received has been of significance. So I just like to, you know, share the information that I collect along the way for people who are perhaps grieving a loved one that has crossed over to the side. It's not the end. As my dad has proved to me, it is not the end. You can still communicate, not as we did in the human life. We have to learn to live with them in a different way. But yes, communication can still happen.
What do you do with the letter? You just leave it out on the table, or how does that work?
Yeah, that is actually on my desk in my study, in my office. And I don't write individual letters because I don't want the letters getting lost or anything like that. So it's actually, you know, like a book. It's like a journal, an actual journal. And I just, you know, write what I want to write. It may take a page. It may just be half a page. And I always ask for a sign, and then it happens. Sometimes I've had to wait a little bit longer than 24 hours, but it's approximately 24 hours, and he's come and put the light on and shows me that, yeah, I've read the letter. He came to me 6 times non-stop in July. That's my birthday month. And it all started like July 15th. Came to me twice in one day. So it does happen. So if any of your fans and followers of, like I said, lost loved ones, keep the faith, because all you need to do is reach out, ask for a sign, and be patient.
I'm just going to put a picture up to close this off to show you and get your opinion on it. I was very close with my grandmother, and she passed away last November. And there was these orbs in this one picture of me at the funeral that were green, and her last name was Greenwell. Do you think those were just some type of camera issue, or do you think there could be something else to these greenish circles that were around me.
Well, that is a very, very interesting picture indeed. One does have to be careful of, camera flares on the lens. But the fact that I've never seen green orbs before, and the fact that green was in your grandmother's last name, is it? Have you tried to speak with your grandmother?
I have, and I have not had any luck. That's the closest evidence I've had.
And she passed in November of 2020?
Yes.
Yeah. Let me say this. My dad, when he passed in November of 2017, I found it took 5 months for my dad to come through. So it's only been a couple of months for your grandmother. I'm sure she's absolutely fine, and she's made it there fine. And I think those orbs could well be a sign for you. Again, you've got to be careful of, camera flares on the lens. But I've never seen a green orb, in all honesty. And the fact that green was in her last name, that could be a sign for you. But if I was you, I would really decide to write a letter to her, tell her that you miss her, bring up a memory link that you've had with her, and ask for a sign from your grandmother, and be patient. And I always light candles for my dad too. I've always got a candle burning in front of a photograph of my dad. But I think you might be surprised. I also purchased an SB7 on the advice of Tony Rathman from Entity Voices. I haven't quite used it yet because it's so frustrating to hear all the white noise in the background and trying to tune in from FM and AM. And I don't know, it's very spontaneous when my dad comes and puts the light on, obviously. I don't know when he's going to do it. He never gives me a day and time. It's all spontaneous. And ADCs, which are after death communication, are always spontaneous. But I did purchase one. I haven't really started to use it. But I tell you what I did do before I got the SB7. I'd used the recording device on my iPhone. Now, I never heard my dad audibly. I had to send the file off to Tony Rathman, and he would put this through his software, clean up the white noise in the background, and then send me the file. And that's when I could hear my dad talking to me. And on one of the shows I did, I had Tony and Cherie Rathman on my show, the Tracie Austin show, a few weeks back. Maybe your fans and followers should check it out on YouTube, the Tracie Austin show. And I actually played the EVP from my dad. And how that all happened was I sent Tony a photograph of me and my dad. And it's at he came to Las Vegas with my mum many years ago in 2011. And I had a photograph taken with my dad, and I sent it to Tony so that Tony could just see what my dad looked like. And I didn't know he was going to use it as part of the test. And he did. And you can hear Tony saying on the audio, I'm looking for a specific gentleman of the name Dan Austin. And Dan, if you can hear this message, I'm holding up a photograph. And you should recognize who's in this photograph, because one of those people is you. Who is the other person in the photograph? There's a pause, and then you can hear my dad with, obviously there's some electronicness in the voice, but you can hear my dad say, "That's me daughter." And I was dumbfounded when I first heard it. Clear as day, that's me daughter. And I have to explain why my dad said me instead of my, because where I'm from in good old Stoke-on-Trent in Staffordshire, that's our slang term for my. A little bit like the Scottish or the Irish dialect, when we say, that's me car, that's me mum, that's me dog, that's me daughter, that's me dad, So that's what we say. That's our slang term for it. But that's what my dad said, which made it even more obvious that that was my dad communicating. That's me daughter.
Wow, that's very interesting. Well,
yep.
I would suggest people you have a YouTube channel, Tracie Austin, where you have some interviews up there. I'll let you tell them where they can find your podcast if they want to look that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you've got 242,000 subscribers. I'd like those subscribers to jump over to my YouTube too. The Tracie Austin Show on YouTube. You'll see some of the shows there. We only just started to do the podcast from January of this year, online via StreamYard, like yourself. Before that, we did a radio show called Let's Talk Paranormal, which you can find on KGRADB, KGRADB.com. It is KGRA Radio. And you can listen to the shows that I've done in the past on KGRA with many, many well-known experts covering all different subjects of UFOs, alien implants, Bigfoot, you name it. But the podcasts are they've started from this year, and we have got more to come. That's the Tracie Austin Show on YouTube. And of course, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
Very good. Well, thanks a lot for joining us and sharing all that very interesting information. And I'll let you close this off however you want for the fans here.
Well, thank you very much indeed for inviting me. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I hope that your fans and followers have learned some interesting things today. Certainly, connecting with your loved ones, it is possible. Don't give up. There is hope. Have faith. It can happen. Just be patient. And when you get a chance, hop over to the Tracie Austin Show and see what we're doing over there as well, because we'd love to have you as fans and followers too. And as I always close out my show on the Tracie Austin Show, keep an open heart and an open mind.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button.